Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Quick on the Draw. We've got Selection Sunday already in the books. This is Thursday. We got tomorrow, the start of the NCAA Tournament for women's lacrosse. The field is set, Dave. I'm Andy Backstrom alongside David Korzenowski, and we've got a great slate of games, 29 teams in this year's tournament. 3 teams have a first-round bye. But first, let's do a recap of some of the conference tournament weekend action. There were 6 games that were decided by 1 goal. A few went into overtime. And let's just start there.
Yeah, Andy, it was a great weekend, and I think it's going to be an even better one coming up here, starting with games on Friday. So we had 14 conference tournament championships over the weekend. The only other conference that had already wrapped up play was the ACC. And man, was this awesome. We had 6 games decided by 1 goal, as you said. I'll start in the NEC, the Northeast Conference. Sacred Heart was the 1 seed. They had an undefeated regular season in conference play, going 8-0, and they beat Wagner 7-6. Don't let the final score fool you. This was a thrilling game. Sacred Heart now punches their ticket to their first ever NCAA tournament. Andy, they trailed by 4 goals at the start of the 4th quarter, and they scored 4 goals in the final 10 minutes. Game winner scored by Maggie Arenio, and Lydia Werlaw was the tournament MVP. She had 5 goals in the semis against St. Francis and a goal and 2 assists in the championship game. Sacred Heart beats Wagner in the NEC to go to the NCAA tournament for the first time. They draw UNC in the first round.
It's a tough bid. It's a tough bid. But obviously, we don't talk too much about the NEC, and that's a great achievement for Sacred Heart there. You just kind of hope that you can compete with UNC at that point, but quite a 4th quarter comeback for them to even make the field. So that's quite an achievement. I'm going to we're going to start with the AAC, which is a conference that we talked about last time that we're just really excited about the future of, because for a long time, it's been Florida and everyone else. Well, now it's Florida, JMU, and everyone else. But JMU beat Florida in the regular season. They came in as top seed in this tournament, but they lose in the title game to Florida. Now, Florida is the 6th seed in the NCAA tournament, while JMU is the 7th seed. So not much separating them. There was only 1 goal separating them in the AAC title game. And again, if you think about this, Florida's now won 11 games straight. The only games they've lost this season are to JMU, Maryland, and UNC. So those are all power this season. And this offensive attack for Florida has been and continues to be led by Danielle Pavanelli. She had 3 goals in the title game. Madison Waters, Emma Lapinto also added 2 goals. And then Maggie Hall has kind of been the quarterback for this Florida team this year. She had a team high 3 assists. But really the defense of Florida is kind of what held them back at times throughout the last few years. But they were strong in this title game. Sarah Resnick was the tournament player MVP. She had 10 saves and a .556 save percentage. And then Becky Browndorf had 3 caused turnovers. So if you're looking at this defense and you're hoping to get a little bit more from Florida, I think that's what you'd like to see going into this NCAA tournament.
Yeah, it's great to see JMU going up against Florida in the AAC. First year for the Dukes in that conference as well, and it certainly lived up to the hype. We were talking last week how the Stony Brooks and the Loyolas might need to get some better competition and move up a conference. This proves why you need that, right? JMU and Florida in the AAC made for a great championship game. Another great one. This was the first that went into overtime, I believe. No, this one was on Sunday. Penn beat Yale 15-14 in OT. Yale had beaten Princeton by a goal in the semifinals on Friday. They won 11-10, and Penn took care of Harvard in their semifinal. Penn was the number 1 seed in the Ivy tournament. Yale was the 2, Princeton the 3, and Harvard 4. Andy, this was an awesome championship game. I mean, we covered the Ivy League pretty extensively over the course of the year, and I'm glad we did, because it came down to the very end. 10 different ties in this championship game. No team led by more than 2 goals the entire way. Jenna Kalignan has been really the star of the Yale offense for the entire year. She had a team high 4 goals. Olivia Penoyer had 6 assists for the Bulldogs, but Penn just would not go away. They trailed early, and they trailed in the 3rd and the 4th quarters as well. But Maria Themelis has a career high 6 goals off of the bench. Previous career high was 4. And Nikki Miles, who drew a lot of the attention from the Yale defense, was able to spread out the ball as well. She finishes with 3 goals and 2 assists. This came down to the last 15 seconds of the first overtime period. And Penn is able to down Yale. Got a feel for the Bulldogs. We'll come back to that later, but Yale left out of the NCAA tournament by that close of a margin.
Yeah, it's the best thing about the Ivy League. It's really across all the sports. You never know who's going to win each year. There's always favorites, but it feels like it always comes down to, the last week or the tournament or something to decide who's getting a bid or who's winning the conference championship. Even in the regular season, it always has some kind of tiebreaker or last weekend that determines it. I mean, I know you've been calling games for Ivy League teams, especially Brown, over the years. And it seems to be there's always some kind of drama. But also, I will say Chris Saylor steps down, and Princeton was such a stronghold in that conference for so long, and now it seems like we got some good parity in the Ancient Eight.
Yeah, it's wide open. Just to chime in, one more point. But at the end of last year, Brown and Harvard's finale in the regular season decided the last team into the Ivy tournament, and the game-winning goal was scored with, I think, under 10 seconds left by Harvard in that one. So just crazy how even those 8 teams are. And Dartmouth took a step up this year as well. But Andy, your next championship game?
Yeah, the ASUN. And really, this was Jacksonville's to win, but Liberty came in as the top seed. And, Liberty just can't seem to catch a break. They were 7-0 in conference play this year. And last year, they also found themselves in the championship game against Jacksonville. And for the second year in a row, Jacksonville has rallied from a somewhat of a rough start to the season. This year, they were 0-3 to start. Last year, they were 3-3. And now here they are again with the auto bid to the NCAA tournament. And, you just look at this game and you see it just back and forth, seesaw. It started with Jacksonville outscoring Liberty 5-2 in the first quarter. Sarah Elms had 4 goals in that frame. Then Liberty comes back and punches them with 7-2, outscoring Jacksonville in the second quarter to take a 9-7 halftime lead. Then the seesaw goes back the other way with Jacksonville outscoring Liberty 5-1 in the third quarter. But a little bit of foreshadowing there as Brianna Samuels scored the final goal of that quarter. And even now that Liberty tied it up to force overtime, again, it was Brianna Samuels to score the game winner in OT. And now you got Liberty out on the outside looking in once again, and you got Jacksonville in the NCAA tournament. And they have to play Florida, which it's an in-state rivalry. And I don't even know if I want to call it a rivalry because Florida has won 13 of the 14 all-time meetings between the two Florida schools. And the last 2 NCAA tournaments, Jacksonville has been one and done. They've won their first round game, but then lost to Florida in the second round. So this time to get Florida in the first round, we'll see if they can pull the upset. But again, Florida is the number 6 seed. It's going to be a tough hill to climb.
It certainly will. And that brings me to the last conference tournament game that I want to highlight. Another 1-goal game. Mercer beats Campbell 11-10 on Sunday. The reason why that is timely, Andy, is Mercer wins and they go to the Gainesville Regional, where they have been the last couple of years. Mercer won by 3 goals over Campbell in the regular season finale. That was with the regular season title on the line. Campbell had a really good year, but Mercer has just owned the Big South for upwards of 5 years now. And it was the Bears who were able to hold off Campbell in the championship game. Now, I'm interested to see Mercer against my alma mater in Notre Dame. Mentioned that Mercer was in the Gainesville Regional the last 2 years. And each of the last 2 years, their first round game was against Florida. They lost by 18 goals back in 2021. 23-5. Last year, closer game, still a lopsided score, 19-12. Florida beats Mercer. But now the Bears get an unseeded team in Notre Dame for a chance to play the winner of that Florida-Jacksonville game. It's going to be interesting because Mercer, high-powered offense, top 10 in the NCAA in shots on goal per game, scoring offense where they're second, shot percentage they're third, and they're really good on the draw as well. 6th in draw controls per game, 7th in draw control percentage. So another good year for Mercer. They run the table in the Big South, and maybe they get a more favorable draw this year in the tournament.
Yeah, imagine that, a Big South upset of the ACC in the first round. I'll take it. For a sport that needs more unpredictability, I think we would all embrace that. Even you, Dave, a
Yeah,
Notre Dame alum, maybe a day after. I don't
just a
know.
little bit. Yeah.
Talk about some upsets or at least some turnarounds. The American East, finally, Albany gets out of the hole. We were just talking before the show. Albany had lost 9 straight American East title games. That's a whole decade of getting oh so close, but not getting that automatic bid. Now, they had made the NCAA tournament last in 2017, so the drought hasn't been that long. Although this time they do get the best of Binghamton and win the title game in the tournament final. Sarah Falk had 5 goals, and she scored the go-ahead goal with 2 minutes and 50 seconds remaining. Came off of a failed Binghamton clear. Binghamton had some ball security problems towards the end of this game, but it was back and forth throughout. It was a 14-13 Albany win. And again, you just have to hand it to the Albany crowd there. The Great Danes really have been knocking on this door for quite a long time. They ultimately get the edge here, and now they're going to the NCAA tournament. And by the way, Albany is 20th in RPI. So if you're looking at RPI, and sometimes those mid-majors get slighted a little bit, they found a way to still be top 20 in that metric, despite maybe some of that strength of schedule disparity.
Yeah, big win for the Great Danes. We'll talk RPI plenty over the rest of the episode, but Albany has ranked really well in RPI over the course of the year, and they are in just outside of the top 20. Yeah, no, they're number 20. Number 20 at the end of the year. They've been there basically most of the season. And also a exciting time for that like region, upstate New York, pretty big in lacrosse. Syracuse obviously has had a lot of success. So Albany has recruited a lot of local talent. They're in a smaller conference in the America East. And now that fan base gets to celebrate in the NCAA tournament. No, they made it a few years back with that at-large bid, but now they get it as America East champs.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we'll move on to the A10, which we talked a lot about last time. And it's just a conference that brings a lot of intrigue, just because last year there was the upset with St. Joe stealing the bid from UMass. I mean, UMass still finds its way into the tournament, but this time around again, they come up short after a strong regular season and a strong winning streak. To end the regular season, they lose to Richmond, which was searching for its first NCAA tournament appearance since 2019. 8 different Richmond players found the back of the net. This is a top 5 offense that I'm really excited about. And they were on full display, 22-12 loss to UMass in the regular season. But this time around, they get some revenge to get the A10 title and get back to the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I was surprised by this one. The pick section from last week, you don't need to go back and look. I may or may not have said that UMass was a lock to win the A10 tournament. I said that I didn't see them losing the A10 tournament 2 years in a row after falling to St. Joe's last year. And Richmond dominated, Andy. I mean, you said it, but 20-13, the final score. I was surprised. This is a UMass team. It looked really good. They're 97-1 in conference play going back to 2011, and that's in the regular season. But now you look at the A10 tournament over the last 5. Obviously, you missed one because of COVID, but UMass only has 1 title in that stretch. Richmond has 3. They beat UMass back-to-back in 18 and 19 and then beat them again this year. St. Joe's won last season. UMass's only title in the last 5 years was in 2021. Worth noting, too, big shout-out to Jana Drummond, first-year head coach for UMass, and first-year head coach Ann Harrington as well. Harrington was the interim head coach last year and was able to guide her team to a victory in her first season at the helm of that Spiders program. Always great to see some longtime assistants and associate head coaches getting their nods. So just wanted to give some love there as well.
Yeah, and check out this stat line for Arden Tierney of Richmond. 3 goals, 3 ground balls, 5 draw controls, 1 cost turnover. That's that do-it-all, two-way midi kind of stat line that you'll post. It seems to be rarer and rarer nowadays, but that's quite impressive. And Colleen Quinn also scored a hat trick in that game. So 15-game win streak is over for UMass. Richmond is the automatic bid, but UMass also makes the NCAA tournament as an at-large. Now we'll go to the Big Ten, which was probably the most marquee tournament still remaining. The ACC had already wrapped up last time we had talked. So we'll talk some Big Ten women's lacrosse here. And Northwestern was my lock. Wasn't a very intimidating or bold pick, but they end up winning the Big Ten championship. Only third time in program history. This tournament's still pretty young, but again, an achievement over a Maryland team that really throughout like all of the 2010s and really a good bulk of the 2000s has just dominated not only this league but this sport as well.
Yeah, I think fair to say that Northwestern is the team to beat in the Big Ten. They have dominated the conference the last few years and earned themselves the number one overall seed. Andy, my biggest takeaway watching this game and unpacking the box score was that Northwestern is starting to have not starting to have the looks. They have the looks of a number one overall seed and a team that's really intimidating come tournament time starting on Friday. First or second in the country in points per game, where they're first, scoring offense, where they're first, shots per game, where they're second, and assists per game, where they're second. Izzy Skane is all but locked up the Tewarton Award this year. She's been the best player in the sport, and she's averaging over 5 goals a game. Charlotte North, in her last 2 years at BC, had 4.86 goals per game in 2021 and even 4 goals per game last year in 2022. I mean, think back to BC, think back to Charlotte North and just how dominant she was, how much of a stranglehold she had on women's lacrosse. And Izzy Skane is putting up those numbers on the offensive end. Now, obviously not the same beast on the draw control circle as well. And a very good free position shooter, but maybe not as good as Charlotte North. I don't think anyone ever has or ever will be. But Izzy Skane, I mean, how scary is that team? You got Molly Liberty in a grad transfer from Tufts who went to the national championship game with the Jumbos last year at the D3 level. You have Izzy Skane on the offensive end. You have a legendary coach in Kelly Amante Hiller. Northwestern is scary, Andy, for sure.
Yeah, you lose Lauren Gilbert, but really there's so much talent there. Even carry over to this season. Haley Radigan, they brought in from Mercer. We talked about her a lot, and she's come on towards the end of this season, really. And I think she was doing an injury towards the beginning part of the year. That's why we didn't hear of her as much. But she's really created a good 1-2 punch with Izzy Skeen. And then Madison Taylor is going to be one of the great ones to come for the next few years in the Big Ten. She's a freshman and certainly doesn't look like one for Northwestern. She's been great this year. And then, you mentioned on the draw, that's one thing that Izzy Skane really doesn't do, or at least, she's not in the circle heading that front. But that's something that really could be the only thing that holds back Northwestern. At times they seem to lag on the draw. That actually was a struggle for them in the Big Ten championship game against Maryland. They had to make a change from Samantha Smith to Serafina DeMuno. And, I don't know if we're going to see quite the same struggle that we saw last year against UNC in the Final Four, where, we have to remember they were on the doorstep of the national championship game, and all of a sudden UNC came roaring back, and it kind of started in the circle.
Yeah, it did. I mean, you covered it really well, Andy, but when we unpacked that Final Four game, when UNC made the switch and put Andy Aldave on the draw late in the third quarter, UNC basically dominated possession the rest of the game. Sam Geiersbach went off. Rest was history. My 2 biggest questions for Northwestern heading into the NCAA tournament are, will they run into a team that can take away possession, to your point about that game against UNC and Maryland, even in the Big Ten championship game? And then how will Molly Liberty do in the NCAA tournament at the D1 level? Now, she went to the national championship with Tufts last year, allowed only 7 goals and made 16 saves in the Final Four. She will be going up against obviously higher level offenses, but she's been great all of this season. With that said, and once we're starting to look towards the NCAA tournament, it'll be good to break down the bracket here. Before we do, just to run you through the rest of the conference championship games over the weekend, USC beats Colorado 12-6 in the Pac-12 chip. Central Michigan wins the MAC. They win 15-12 over Robert Morris. Loyola wins the Patriot League another year, 13-8 over Army. Stony Brook dominates Towson in the CAA championship, 19-4. Fairfield wins the MAC with 2 A's, 17-4 over Siena. We mentioned the Richmond 7-goal win over UMass. Denver beats UConn 11-6. And those were your conference championship games. Andy, here is the bracket. This is what it looks like after Selection Sunday. when this came out on Sunday night, what were a couple of your biggest takeaways?
Yeah, the elephant in the room is Denver. And really, you look at the bracket, they're the only undefeated team in this entire field, in this sport this season, but they're the fifth seed. And you're kind of looking at it being like, huh, that doesn't add up. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But yeah, when I look at this bracket, I'm looking at mainly, first things first, the last four in: Penn State, Drexel, Marquette, UMass. Okay. The first four out: Yale, second year in a row, Towson, Villanova, and Stanford. So they were just on the edge of that. But the things that jump at my attention, aside from Denver, is that Syracuse grabs the 2 seed despite losing 2 of its 3 final games, which I guess confuses me a little bit because you never really know where the committee is leaning. I know they value RPI significantly, but they also seem to usually cite late season success. In this case, they seem to refer to Syracuse's body of work, aka early season success.
Right.
So seems a little bit selective to me. I'm not saying they're not deserving. They did have a great season. It was a little bit deflating from an objective standpoint to see them slide towards the end of the year, but they end up with the 2 seed regardless. And then probably my other takeaway too is just that we have Marquette and Army making their first appearances, and I'm just glad they got in because they had 2 special seasons.
Yep.
And Marquette was bounced a little bit earlier than expected in the Big East tournament. They didn't make the final. They lost to UConn. And then Army made the final against the Patriot League, which I felt like locked them up for a spot, but you just really never know. So I'm glad both of those programs are in.
Yeah, I agree on Army and Marquette. They were 2 of the most fun teams to watch all year. And if they don't make May Madness, then what are we doing, right? So good that the Golden Eagles, Black Knights are in. Initially, one of my first thoughts was about Stony Brook. So they're not an 8 seed this year, but they might as well be. And if you look at the past 6 tournaments, they have been the 8 seed or played the number 1 overall seed 4 times. So in 2022 and 2021, they were the 8 seed and ended up having to play the number 1 overall seed UNC. Back in 2017, they were the 8 seed, lost to the number 1 seed Maryland by 1 goal. It was their closest game for the Terrapins all tournament when Kathy Reese's squad won the national championship. Then in 2019, they weren't seeded an 8 seed, but they had to play Maryland as the number 1 overall seed the next round, in the second round instead of the quarterfinal. And then in 2018, that's the only time that they have not lost to the number 1 overall seed. Instead, they lost to the number 4 seed BC, who went on to lose in the national championship. It's just a tough draw every year, it seems, for Joe Spalina's squad. Now, am I picking nits a little bit with them being an 8 seed as opposed to like a 7 or a 6? Maybe, but the fact that they've lost and gotten bounced by the number 1 overall seed 4 times since 2017 is noteworthy. And now if you look at the tournament this year, they will get a matchup with presumably Loyola, who's the number 8 seed, for a matchup against the number 1 overall seed Northwestern. So that's assuming it goes chalk, but interesting there. Next thought, Andy, was when the bracket initially came out, my eyes went to the bottom left, the UNC quadrant of the bracket, if you will, for exactly the reason that you just said, with Denver being the only undefeated team in the country. And I looked at also at Richmond and Marquette in there and said, all right, that's the strongest quadrant. Unpacked it a little bit more, and I think I've changed my stance there. Strongest quadrant, at least by RPI, is in the top left. That's the Syracuse quadrant with the orange as the number 2 overall seed. Andy, I did a little exercise where I added up the RPI of the top 7 teams in the quadrant. Now, obviously, that bottom left is the only one with 8 teams, so I didn't count Sacred Heart. But quadrant 2, that's the Syracuse region, has the best sum in terms of RPI. They have 6 teams in the RPI top 20 in Syracuse, James Madison, Maryland, who's not seeded, Johns Hopkins, UMass, and Army. All of those teams are in the top 20 in the RPI. Drexel is not. Drexel is 23rd. Just for context, the BC quadrant and the UNC quadrant each have 5 teams in the RPI top 20. Northwestern's quadrant has just 4 teams in the RPI top 20. So you're looking at the Syracuse quadrant as the one to watch, the best overall pool of teams. But I'm excited. I mean, it just shows how many teams have a chance to go on a run here and how competitive it'll be.
Yeah, a couple of things on that too, because I was talking about how Syracuse ends up with a 2 seed, and it seems like a benefit to them, but in the long run, it almost seems like you'd prefer the 3 seed just because of what you just said, and also just on face value there, it seems like BC might have the easiest ticket to the national title game, or at least the Final Four. And really, it's another thing to talk about too. The Toward Award, it's really heavily factored in of how far you can go in this tournament. And it feels like all season it's been a two-way race between Megan Tyrell of Syracuse and Izzy Skane of Northwestern. And now, if Syracuse has an early exit, either in their first game or their second game, well, then it feels like if it hasn't been already locked up, then it will be then for Izzy Skane, assuming that Northwestern makes the run we're anticipating them to make. But yes, we'll go forward with some more NCAA tournament talk here. I think the snubs this year, I feel like for most part, the committee got it right. They're really, last year I was really impassioned about Arizona State not getting a bid, and there were a few others that were kind of on the cusp that you could argue. This time around, I really think the only team that you could maybe make an argument for is Yale. And that's more just out of, I don't know, sadness for the program. Like the Ivy League's been up in the air this year more than it has really in quite a long time. And it felt like everyone that they had coming back, that it was going to be their year to win it. Even Joe Spallina said earlier in the season that was his pick. It felt like all of our pick to win the Ivy, and they just had a really struggle towards the end of the season, and now they're on the outside looking in.
Yeah, when I was going through my biggest snubs, the teams that I wrote down were Yale and Navy. And again, after I did some research pretty quickly, I mean, there's not a huge case to be made that either team was left out or deserved to be in. I mean, Yale, let's rewind to before they played Army, right? Through their first 10 games, they're 8-2, they're in the top 15. Then they beat Army in a top 15 matchup. They're 9-2. They closed the year 1-3 in Ivy play and lost by 2 goals to Cornell, who didn't even make the conference tournament. Just not the way that Yale wanted to end. Navy as well. I mean, the case for Navy pretty much falls out the window when you look at the fact that they lost to Army twice, right? There's not much of a defense after that. So yeah, obviously would love to have seen Yale in, to see an at-large from the Ivy. I think that just speaks to the Ivy's parity more than anything, and just getting penalized a bit for the end of their season. I think the elephant in the room, let's tackle it, Andy. I've unpacked all the numbers on Denver. 19-0 overall, 17-0 in the regular season, won both Big East tournament games. Quote from an NCAA committee member who spoke to the media: on face value, when we sat down with the numbers, UNC's number of wins against the top 10 group of teams was just more significant. Denver is the 5 seed. UNC is the 4. Andy, the floor is yours.
I just don't get it, because what else are you supposed to do at this point besides switch conferences, which, as we all know, alignment is heavily dependent on the revenue sports, which unfortunately are mainly just football and men's basketball. And if you're Denver at this point, there's not much you can control. You beat all the ranked teams you had to face. That's 6 ranked wins. You beat Maryland and Boston College, which have won national championships in the last half decade. And really, if you look at their schedule, yes, there were some close games. The eyesore is losing 5-4 or winning 5-4 against Louisville in the opener, which really just makes no sense. But there's a few others that were 1-goal games. But by and large, this was a dominant season, and it should be rewarded as such for Denver. I mean, if you're looking for an incentive of other teams, oh, we just got to win every game we can, and you get a 5 seed. I mean, Stony Brook has been kind of slighted at times in the seeding process. Loyola has been slighted at times in the seeding process. And I love the ACC. I think it's the best conference. I think the Big Ten is also not equally talented, but in years, it's comparable. I just don't think it's acceptable to have an undefeated team not be in the top 4.
If UNC and Denver played tomorrow, UNC probably wins the game. But Denver deserved the number 4 seed at a minimum. And I honestly would have probably put him even a little bit higher. Andy, I went and looked at wins over top 10 teams. I went by RPI. It also holds for the Inside Lacrosse poll. Denver 2-0, wins over BC and Maryland. UNC's 4-3. Okay. They beat James Madison, Florida, BC, and Syracuse in the ACC tournament. They lost to Northwestern, Syracuse in the regular season, and BC in the ACC tournament. 1-1 against BC, 1-1 against Syracuse, 0-1 against Northwestern. Wins over teams in the tournament. Denver, 6 wins in the regular season, then beat UConn again in the Big East tournament. Overall record 7-0. UNC, record against teams in the NCAA tournament, 5-4. Basically that exact record that I just said against the top 10 teams, and then one more win and one more loss. So I don't get it. Those records aren't that impressive for UNC. They are just being rewarded by the number of top 10 or tournament teams that they're playing. It's not even winning percentage in those categories.
Yeah, and it seems like that win over Syracuse in the ACC tournament, the committee's valuing really high. And again, it goes back to them valuing Syracuse strangely high, even though the same late season struggles they hold against teams like Yale seem to not matter for Syracuse. I don't know. Again, that's the murky part of the committee here. But my last take on this is that national seeds should be rewards for how you perform in the regular season, in the conference tournament, and not a power ranking of which teams are the best in the field. I mean, at that point, what are we doing? There's no point. You don't earn that. That's just opinion-based, RPI-based. So I do think that Denver has a lot to prove. I hope they get to do it. You know, they've had a couple of nice regular seasons before that have been kind of uprooted in the NCAA tournament. They'll have a tough path to the title game this year, or even the Final Four if they want to make it. But let's go highlight our first round games that kind of catch our eye going into this first weekend. For me, I'll start. You know, I'm looking at Marquette and Richmond. It's 2 top 5 offenses, and really 2 of, in my opinion, some of the better stories in the sport this year. If you're looking at Marquette, you know, Mary Schumacher is probably one of the most intriguing players, or at least feeders, in the sport this year. She's got 69 assists. And then Lydia Faust is just a great goal scorer with 58 goals this season. And if you're looking at this team, you got 3 players with 40 or more goals. And honestly, Marquette had a big threat in the Big East. It's a little bit unfortunate they lost to UConn, and nothing to take away from UConn's season, but I was really looking to see another rematch with that stout Denver defense. But then on the Richmond side of things, again, we saw in the A-10 tournament, I even mentioned already Arden Tierney, but then Lindsey Frank was someone that really jump-started a run there that separated Richmond from UMass in that title game. She had 3 straight goals and made a 6-0 run for Richmond there that helped them separate from UMass. But this is another team, again, Colleen Quinn, I mentioned, she has more than 50 goals this season. You're going to see a lot of goals scored between these 2 teams. I could see it getting up towards 20 goals apiece, and it's going to be a great matchup.
Certainly is, Andy. I'm looking at it now, and I believe, all right, so there are 2 matchups where the win total between the 2 teams that are playing is 31. One of them is what you just said in Richmond and Marquette. The other is Loyola Maryland against Fairfield. The only one that's higher is my pick, 32 combined wins between James Madison and Army. So I'm looking at JMU as a legitimate national championship level team. They played UNC at the beginning of the season and lost, but they have a 3-headed monster in Isabella Peterson, Ty Jankowski, and Caitlin Morgan on the offensive end, and a really good goalie in Kat Buchanan. And Army's been one of the best stories in the sport this year. Top 20 in the country in shots per game, draw controls per game, and scoring offense. Julia Franzoni and Allison Riley have been great. For me, I'm looking at Army. If they can spread out the offense, it sometimes leans a little bit too heavily on Riley and Franzoni. But I think that should be an awesome game. Andy, let's rewind to the beginning of the year. Our final 4 picks at the start of the season. We're going to expose ourselves here. Now, we didn't do too bad. I had UNC, Maryland, Northwestern, and Stony Brook. And in the championship, I had Maryland over UNC. My biggest mistake this year, I think I just thought Maryland would be better. I think a lot of people did. And I don't have them in the Final Four now. Your pick was Maryland, Northwestern, BC, and Florida. You had an all Big Ten matchup in the championship game, Northwestern over Maryland. Andy, give me your updated picks now, as well as one surprise Elite Eight team that we should be looking out for.
Yeah, I'm going with Northwestern, Maryland still. I just feel like if there's an unseeded team to make it out, it's going to be Maryland, which doesn't even feel like an unseeded team because they were the preseason number two. But then I also have BC that are just quite frankly playing too well right now to not make it in their quadrant. And then Denver, I'm just kind of pulling for them. I think they got all the talent to do it, but we'll see. Then my kind of sleeper Elite Eight team, I'm going with Penn State. I think that this is a Penn State team that made Final Four a couple times in the 2010s, and I feel like they had a little bit of a rough end to the regular season, but they got all the talent there, and they could have a second round matchup with Loyola. You never really know what you're going to get with Loyola in the tournament. Maybe they pull the upset there and make the Elite Eight. What about you? What's your 4 picks and your sleeper here for the Elite Eight?
Yeah, so I have two of the same as my preseason Final Four in Northwestern and UNC. Then I have James Madison coming out of that Syracuse quadrant. I think JMU can do it. I think Maryland's in a bit of a down year. JMU also beat Maryland in the regular season, but what makes me nervous about that is JMU beat Maryland in the regular season and probably won't. I mean, I shouldn't say probably won't. It's very hard to beat that team twice. Very hard to do. The only team that's really done it in recent history is Northwestern, and it's because they're in the same conference. And then I got BC as well. My surprise Elite Eight team is Virginia. I said that Denver, I'm pulling for Denver too, man. I swear, I promise. But I said that their kryptonite would be a high-powered offense who can neutralize their strength. And UVA is a high-powered offense, top 10 in the country in scoring offense. They also don't turn the ball over. Third fewest turnovers in the country. Denver's game is causing turnovers. If UVA has a good first quarter, I think it'll be tough on Denver. But that wraps it up, Andy. Ready for this weekend?
Absolutely. I want upsets. I want all the upsets. Give me some May Madness and give me some unseeded teams making a run. That's what we need. I don't want chalk this time around, but either way, it's exciting round of games, and hopefully all you will watch and tune in.